Hello and welcome to my Autism Ally podcast, where we come together to share helpful information about autism.
In this episode, we're going to speak with Steve about case management. Welcome, Steve.
Hi.
Hi, Steve. This is Steve Buckles from IPMG, and we're really excited for him to be here today. We're going to get started. We've got a whole list of questions, and we're going to talk about what is case management. So, Steve, your first question, what is case management, and why do I have it?
Well, good. The first question is I'll just read the basic thing from the ddrs Waiver Manual. And what that is, that's a good thing for families to reference all the time. When you first get on the waiver, whether it's the FS waiver or whether it's the CIH waiver, it's a good manual that is out there that tells you all about waiver services. And particularly, I always tell parents the section that they want to look at is section 10, because it is a big manual. If you actually print it out, it's about an inch thick, double-sided. And so I say don't print out the whole thing. You can view it online, particularly if you want to print it out. Look at section 10, because what that shows is all the various services that waiver provides in the state of Indiana. And one of them is case management services. And the definition in there for case management services is basically case management is a service that's to assist the individual to gain access for needed services, whether it's waiver services, Medicaid services, as well as any other medical, social, educational, other services, regardless of their funding source, whether it's paid or unpaid. In fact, what I like to do a lot of the time is ideally is to get those natural supports and unpaid services out there, because the bigger web of people that you have around the individual that they can help them live independently, the better off they are. And then it also says that case management services is that we do what's called person-centered planning. The current thing we're doing is called Charting a Life course, and it's all around person-centered and positive developments in the individual's person's life. And that's probably one of the most important things that needs to be brought to the table is positivity, looking forward. Case management should not be a negative interaction with somebody else, whoever that case manager is working with. It should be a positive experience about what they want to do with their lives and then their future. So that's what basically case management is.
And we will be sure to have the link to the ddrs manual in the show notes.
Okay, sure.
Now, you talked about case management, but what about hiring, firing of a case manager? How does that work? Because we have families who maybe struggle with communication, and I know that's a big thing to have. You got to have good communication with your case manager, but how do we go about if we struggle?
Okay, well, absolutely. One of the things I always tell people, and I've had people that chose no longer to have me as their case manager. In fact, I spoken with Susan about a scenario that I had in the past where when I first got in, typically when you're first become a case manager, you get assigned a group of individuals. And I had a lady that got assigned to me, and she says, well, you know what? I've never had males on my team. And you know what? I like females, but I'll give you a shot. And so I had her on my caseload for about 3 years. And then one day she finally came up to me and said, you know what? I'd really like to have a female case manager. That is no problem. I always tell people, and I encourage people, one of the things that we say in our meetings is we discuss rights. And one of the biggest rights that a person has is the right to change services and providers, including case managers, at any given time. And so I always tell them if they think they need to change case managers, just come and tell me. And I encourage that because it's like my responsibility as a case manager is to help that person have a positive life. And if they don't think that we're working out, it's my responsibility to help them find somebody else that can maybe help them out more than I can. So that's the first thing you can do. Also, typically, if and actually, I've had consumers do that over the years. A lot of times, families are afraid to do that to the case manager and talk to the case manager about that. But really, if the case manager is a good case manager and ethical, that should never be a problem. I've helped several people over the years find new case managers because they didn't think it was working out. I'm not offended by that. My job is to make sure that they have a positive outcome in their lives. And if they think they need a different case manager, that's fine. Basically, what I do at that point is I provide them the pick list. I also ask them, well, do you just want somebody different from our company? If that occurs, I contact our office and let them know. And they basically, I'd say, well, I can help you find a new case manager. And they send us a list of available case managers. And then what I always do with every family or individual is I encourage them to interview more than one case manager. In fact, I do that with every service that a person's looking at. I never tell an individual that, oh, you need to do this person or this agency, because that's not choice. And
as a matter of fact, that's not exactly even legal for you to be doing. Is, from my understanding, is that you can help a family limit list. We've chatted before about the size of some of the pick lists. They're enormous. And a person can ask their case manager is if they know which companies have openings, but they can't ask a case manager to refer to who they think the best one is.
Right. And I always tell people, in fact, we were talking about an upcoming outreach event we're doing, and I inevitably, every outreach event, I have some parent or individual come up and ask me, well, why is IPMG or why is the greatest company to work for? Or why should I pick somebody there? Or why should I pick you as a case manager? And I always tell people right up front that you need to interview your case managers and make that determination. I said there's plenty of good case managers out there, regardless of company. I could go on hours to tell you why I like working with IPMG, but does that really affect your circumstance? It doesn't. What's more important is your relationship with your case manager. I also tell people that, if they don't feel comfortable in talking to me, when I initially meet people, I always give them a business card, and it has a customer service number on it. They can call that customer service and say, hey, I'd like to change case managers. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. I typically, if they've done that, I'll ask them, well, why do you want to change case managers? Because I really need to know what, if I've done something that offended them or things like that, I need to know to be a better case manager. Or finally, if they don't feel comfortable in doing that, they can always call the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities. And the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities, or the short name acronym for that, is BDDS. BDDS. They can call them and they will send them a case management pick list as well. So there's basically three different ways that you can change case managers. And like I said, I always encourage people to interview several case managers. I know some people are like, when they meet somebody, they get assigned, that's fine and it works out. But I said, don't hesitate in asking, hey, can I talk to a couple different people? Typically, families pretty much, when they introduce you, they say yay or nay when you talk to them about wanting you to come on board. But if it's an individual, particularly if they live in a supported living setting and they don't have a good ring of supports around them, except they live in a supported living home, I always sit down with them and say, okay, we're going to do this look at at least three different people or three different individuals that you can look at and see which one to choose. And it's hard for them. I got to tell you, when I do that, it's hard, but it's a good way to make a choice, because a lot of times when I do that with individuals, the first person they meet, they go, oh, I want to hire that one. Okay, well, we got 2 more to do. Really? And I go, yeah, really. And so we do 2 more, and lo and behold, after they've interviewed 3, they're like, well, you know what, I actually like that second person that I talked to. Well, that's why we, or the third person. So that's why, and sometimes the first person they still like. And I said, well, that's why we interview, because I want you to have a good choice.
And it's important when you're picking and choosing the services to interview, because these people are going to be in your homes. These people are going to be interacting with your child or your loved one with a disability. And so it is important that you feel comfortable around them, and that that you trust them, and that's just a good fit for your family.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, as far as things that case managers do, you know, I read you the generic thing out of the waiver manual, what we do, but you know, I do all sorts of stuff besides helping prepare the annual budget. I also do what's called level of care. That basically keeps the person eligible for services. If there's any updates in services, that's a change in the plan, and I have to do that. We also help develop what's called a PCISP. It's a person-centered individual support plan, which basically lays out what that person wants about their future. So we do a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that's going on that people don't necessarily know that we're doing. I try very little. I talk very little to the individual about level of care, and in fact, I think I've spoken. Anytime I have a level of care coming up, I tell people about it, but I generally don't interview them for level of care, because it's exactly what I don't want to talk about. When we do level of care, it's totally based. The questions are totally based on what they can't do, and one of the things that I feel is a good quality of a case manager is that they're talking about the things you can do or want to do. And when we start going down that thing where it's a meeting, and every time I show up to the meeting, it's a dreadful experience. Who wants to have those meetings? I don't enjoy those meetings. I've came on to teams where that's what the standard was. We gripe at the individual about what they're doing poorly. Well, it's like, no, we're not doing that. You know, let's talk about what the successes that person has had, and what are their dreams, and how are we going to get there. Also, one of the things when I come into meetings is I always, you know, people always ask, well, what are some things to look for? I always talk to the individual as much as I can. I'll talk, even if their parents are there and they don't speak very well, or they have very limited communication. I always talk with them. It just shows respect. And you need to have that relationship of respect. The person needs to know that you are on their side and looking out for their best interest. And some people don't understand that when we come on. My responsibility as a case manager is to support that individual through good choices, bad choices, whatever. I can give them suggestions. I have people that ask me, and well, what do I think? And I will tell them, but I also tell them that, you know, I do this I do it quite frequently, and at least every year I go over them and I tell them that, hey, I will always give you suggestions. Do you have to listen to any of my suggestions? And they go, no, Steve. I said, that's right. I am a mentor. I give you suggestions, but you don't have to listen to my suggestions. You can do your own thing. And to be honest with you, their actual original idea may work out better than whatever I suggested anyway. All we can do is make suggestions from our perspective. So I always do that. Like I said, I always listen to the person that I'm working with. I am always positive about things. Now, we may discuss something that happened, but that should not be the majority of the meeting. It should not be a beat up session in meetings when I meet with somebody. It might be, oh, I heard this went on. What happened? And then we move on.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, because you shouldn't dwell. You know, everybody has bad times in their lives, and everybody has done stupid things in their lives, and no one
just a little.
Yeah. No one likes to be reminded every time they see them how bad they've been. That's a terrible way to build a relationship with somebody. Oh,
Yeah.
you're the guy that always tells me how awful I am. Yeah. Okay, I want to hang around with you. So
it kind of sounds like what makes that good case manager is communication and building that relationship. Would you add anything else to what makes a case manager good?
Well, I was going to say, because I work with case managers, I'm a power of attorney for a gentleman. And like I said, the most important thing is that they're honest with you. You know, I always tell people that I'll be honest with you. You may not always like what I have to say. I'll be honest with you. And if I don't know something, that's another key thing. As both of you two know, there is so much to know in this field. And plus, a lot of times I get questions about Social Security, which I'm not a specialist in. Actually, Medicaid, I'm not a specialist in either. And so it's okay to say, I don't know, but let me look around and find out. Because, you know, the nice thing about our company is we're always allowed to ask other case managers, hey, this is what I'm running into. Does anybody have any suggestions where they did? Like I had a lady recently who is pregnant. Well, I've never worked with somebody who's pregnant that I've had services with, and I'm not that great on knowing what actual services are out there for prospective mothers and those services around that. So I sent out an email and I got like 10 responses back of all the services that are available statewide and in Allen County. And then I shared that information with her to make sure she had it, and made sure to follow up that she was getting some of those services and looked into them. And she has been following up with them and getting the checks and things like that. So we do that. And then let's see, also we actually have certain case managers in our agencies that specialize in certain areas. I have a case manager that I talk to all the time that all she does, she's a case manager like me, but she actually specializes in Medicaid information. And so like if a family's having problems maintaining their Medicaid status, and they ask me a question about it, I can always contact her, or she'll even contact them directly and help them work through that situation. We have a lady on our team that does nothing. She's actually one of the office personnel, and she spends a great deal of her time helping families navigate house, like ramps, purchases like that you can get through Medicaid, and how you do that, because that can be a fairly complicated process. I just recently had a family that they live in a 1950s ranch, and they have a son that's in a wheelchair and he's non-ambulatory. Well, she was able to work with them, and they had somebody come in and redo the bathroom so that it would be easier for them to get him in and out of the shower. And that's all she does is she answers questions. She answers, okay, yeah, that can't be approved by Medicaid to purchase it. So
that is super cool, Steve. And it kind of leads into, you can basically ask your case manager all sorts of questions. They are supposed to be a liaison for information, how to access resources in the community. It's even if it doesn't seem like it's necessarily directly waiver services related, your case manager can possibly be of assistance. And when I talk to families, I always tell them it's completely fine, manager, to say, I don't know, but I want to hear the words, but I'm going to help you. I'm going to find out for you to follow that statement, because they're supposed to be a part of your team that is helping you obtain a variety of services for your loved one with disability. So how often should my case manager be reaching out to me? I talk to families all the time, and I'll say something about, well, when's the last time you had a case management meeting? And they're like, what's that? And so then I talk to them about, well, you're supposed to be having these meetings and you're supposed to be doing this. And so can you kind of clarify, like, what are the rules? How often should a case manager be reaching out to you?
Well, a case manager should be doing something every month, whether they're calling you or sending information or things like that. They should be checking in on a regular basis. Now, as far as requirements as far as meetings go, they typically do 4 meetings a year. Now, one thing that gets confusing for families now is they've actually changed the rules for who all has to be at the meetings. In the old days, which is old days, what I mean is just about a couple of years ago.
Pre-COVID, right?
Yeah, pre-COVID. It used to be that you would have 4 meetings a year and everybody on the team would show up to every meeting. Well, then they changed the rules now where I need to meet with the individual and their family at least quarterly, so 4 times a year, but all the other providers that are involved with that individual only need to show up for the annual meeting and the semi-annual meeting. Now, I have a lot of meetings where everybody shows up at every meeting, but technically they only need to be at the semi-annual and annual meeting, the whole team. Like I did a meeting this morning before this where I just met with the individual and found out how he was doing. And that was his quarterly meeting. I didn't need to talk to the rest of the team, didn't need to have the rest of the team present. I was just talking to him and seeing how things are going. You know, there's certain things that we have to go over every time. Typically with a person, you know, we have to hear how their health has been. One of the things we kind of look at is, okay, if they're in school, okay, that's cool. If they're working a job, okay, how's your job doing? Do you want a job? We have to go over their rights at every meeting. And so those are the types of things we have to go over at every meeting. A lot of focus has been recently on emergency plans. And that is what would happen if their supports would disappear, what would happen? Or if a loved one would their primary caregiver would pass away, or things like that. Those are actually probably the toughest discussions that I have with families, because just like you and I, talking about somebody passing away and what's going to happen after that is a very difficult discussion. And with me, each family's different, because some families don't want to talk about that at all. And then others are actually pretty open to it, because it's like, you're taking care of your son or daughter, at some point in your life that may not be able to take care of yourself, let alone take care of somebody else, or you may just end up passing away. What are your wishes for your loved one? And making sure that happens, because in Indiana, there are, when you're dealing with supports for individuals, there is no emergencies. What we consider emergency, like a loss of a loved one, things like that, Indiana considers that a process. And so, yeah, you're like going, okay, I had a lady that ended up in a hospital. She had a heart attack. Her daughter's at home. She's always raised her. And had her the whole time. She has a heart attack, and then we're trying to find services. Oh. Well, yeah, and and again, and of course her daughter's on the small waiver, the FS waiver, as opposed to CIH waiver. Yeah. And so, and just to let parents know, the difference between the FS waiver or the FSW waiver and the CIH waiver is the FSW waiver was implemented several years ago to allow families to get a capped amount of money in which they could purchase some services for their loved one or the individual. What the CIH waiver is basically it is an uncapped waiver in which it's totally based on need. The reason they used to, in the old days, that's all they had was the based on need waiver. Well, what they found out is the reason they put the FS waiver in place, or the family supports waiver in place, was because unfortunately when they just had the open-ended waiver, they were spending so many resources on those open-ended waivers that if you were a family and you wanted supports for your child, you were going to have to wait 10 plus years to get it. Which is like, okay, if you have a child with maybe, and you could always apply. So if you had a child that had like something that can be diagnosed before they're born, like Down syndrome or something like that, you could apply as soon as you were born. But even then, you were not going to see services until they were 10. And if you have a child that is diagnosed with autism, generally first diagnosis doesn't happen until 3.5, 4, maybe even 5. add 10 years to that, and that's when you're going to start getting services.
I remember when I was applying for Matthew, and he was 2.5, and I was sitting in the beads office, and the lady basically said, yeah, this is going to be something you'll be able to use after he graduates high school. You'll get it around then. And I remembered thinking, what am I supposed to do until then? Because he was 2 and they're talking 18, 20. Yeah. And, you know, I'm glad that the things are not that way in Indiana anymore. Right now, the wait lists are much lower, although they have increased a bit because of the pandemic. But hopefully that's just a temporary for right now. So Sam's got another question for you, Steve.
Sure.
Yeah. So what should I do if my case manager doesn't respond to me? Because we get that question a lot. And, you know, sometimes it's hard to know what to do next.
Okay. Well, like I said, when I first meet with a family, I always give them my business card. And typically any information you get, usually like on mine, it has my number, but then it also has a contact number or a customer service number. You can always call that number. And like I said, if I get customer service call, I've never got one because they were trying to get a hold of me. It's usually, hey, we need get a hold of somebody else, or it's a question that they just thought of and they thought, oh, okay, I'll call this number. That's the first number to call because they will immediately contact the case manager and say, hey, we got a call about this. What are you doing to follow up on it? And so that might be what has happened. Also, you know, they do have, every case manager does have a supervisor, and that's important too. You can always feel comfortable. I tell everybody, my supervisor is Casey Bach. If you have an issue with me or anything I'm doing, you can certainly call her. And I'm like one of those people that, hey, if you have a concern about me, I will give you my boss's number and you can talk to her about it. I've never been afraid to say, this is who you can call. And like I said, if it's one of those things where it gets it's a real big problem, you can always call BEADS or the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services and talk to them about it as well. But typically, if it's an internal matter, I would just call the customer service number. Pretty much every company has one of those, and you will be able to talk to somebody and say, hey, this is what's going on. And they'll certainly talk to that case manager.
Exactly. I can tell that I've dealt with services and changing of case managers multiple times since my son's been on the waiver, and that's good advice to call the customer center. And then if they don't, if you think things aren't working out, you know, you spoke earlier to, it's a really easy process to change case managers and be able to, if you decide to stay with that company and just change the case manager, but then you also have the option to change case management companies. And, you know, again, the case management company can assist with that, or the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities can assist with that. And we'll be sure to link BEADS information in the show as well. So to kind of go along with that, what are some signs that maybe I should think about changing my case management company?
Okay. Well, I always think that if you've had multiple failures with case managers you've had with a certain company, that's always a possibility. You know, if they are non-responsive to your concerns, like I said, I would think that would be silly that people wouldn't be responsive to a parent or individual's concerns, but if they weren't, that would be an indicator. I can't imagine people not being responsive to individuals' concerns, but you know, you never know. So that would be my thing as far as changing companies. Another thing is if you're having a lot of turnover, because I know when I first got on, I was getting a lot of people, well, gosh, you're the third case manager I've had in a year and a half, 2 years. And I go, well, I'm not planning to go anywhere. So And I think that's probably the biggest issue that a lot of families have is when you're starting to have a lot of turnover in case managers. Now, I've got to say that at IPMG, I think they've done a good job working with individual case managers to help them understand their job and be good at their job. We have a lot of different training things to help people. And like I said, I work on a team of like 20 case managers, and there's like 3 or 4 groups here in the Fort Wayne area that are groups of like 15 to 20 that we work together to support each other, because we generally work on our own. Like today I'm speaking in my apartment, but we have a team of people around us that help us and support us. And if we have a question, that's the first thing. I had a case manager that sent me a thing the other day that I didn't realize she was new to our meeting. And we actually had we have monthly meetings where some are face-to-face and some are virtual. And we had actually two teams together last week. And one of the ladies was there who knew me from several years ago. It's been like 10, 15 years ago. And she said, well, I look a little bit different than I do then. And I said, well, you should just came up and talked to me. I said, that's fine. But I told her, the first thing I always say is that if you have any questions, don't hesitate in giving me a call. Don't hesitate in talking to your supervisor. Don't hesitate in talking to your other team members, because we will walk you through that. Because particularly when you're new, Insight system, which is what we enter when we're developing NOAs and CCBs, those are basically how we pay for the services, is a pretty difficult process when you're new. And so it does.
I can imagine that being overwhelming, because a large chunk of the job, saying, okay, here's the budget, here's how much things cost, and you can't go over the budget. And,
right.
And balancing what an individual or a family wants versus the reality of what's left in the budget.
Right. And that is something I talk quite regularly. Well, when I talk with family members, that's the thing is, okay, we want to do all this. Well, this is how much money is available. Or if there's changes from time to time, we might have to get back together and go, okay, this is where we need to be on this budget. Because particularly with the family sports waiver, you have $19,300 a year to purchase services. Now, for a new family who comes on board going, oh gosh, that's a lot of money.
It is
not,
until
it is until that's right.
Yeah. And yeah, it is until you start, if you need some behavior supports, that's an expensive service. And like I said, particularly on the smaller waiver, there is nothing that is just like included. Because on the smaller waiver, case management is a required service, and it comes right out of that $19,300. When you get the larger waiver, there's a lot of services that are automatically in there that does not take away from your budget, like case management, transportation. Let's see, what else is in there? Wellness doesn't take away if you qualify for wellness. So those are services that can be automatically in there, and they don't take away from your budget at all. Particularly if you have somebody that, if you're a parent, because what I find out a lot of times with particularly behavior management services, you've been a mom and you've been around your son or daughter for a while, and you're running into these walls and you're going, I've tried everything and I don't know what to do. And so a lot of times I say, well, why don't you try behavior management service and see, maybe they can give you some good ideas, or maybe they can give you maybe some ideas that you've already thought about, but a different way of approaching it. Because it can be, when you're dealing with an individual that's having some fairly substantial behavioral issues that's keeping them from moving ahead in their lives, whatever that is. Behavior management services is a valuable service that can be used. And I've had behavior management services used very creatively over the years. I have a mom right now who has reached that wall, and she had behavior management services like 8 years ago when I first started with her and her son. And now she's like, I've kind of hit the wall. I need some help. And I said, well, let's look at behavior management services again. And again, what we did was I gave her a list of, 3 or 4 different case managers that I gotten from providers that they said they were available and had room on their budget. She interviewed them and picked one. So
Good.
And I think that's a big thing, that it is definitely a process, but having that case manager definitely helps in talking about the different services, knowing what's out there, and that's what they're paid to do. They're there to help guide you, answer questions, and get you just a little bit more information about what can be beneficial. Not that you have to take what they suggest, as you've said eloquently, but it's important to have that one person you can go to.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we're the individuals that are always, our job is to support the individual, no matter what their dreams are. And it can be sometimes one of the things that's kind of hard, even if a person has a guardian, we have to sometimes navigate that relationship with their guardian or their loved one, because their idea of what they want in the future and what their guardian loved one sees of them in the future can be different.
Oh,
and
yes.
So, and you know what, and sometimes, particularly, like, I've had situations where they have not had, the individual and their guardian have not had a great relationship. So sometimes my role is to build that relationship back together on a positive thing, because as far as the guardian and the individual is concerned, or the loved one it's been nose to nose for the last forever. Well, and again, that's where I go back and say, we're going to talk about what's positive, because it's like, it's so much easier to move forward when we're talking about what the person can do, as opposed to spending all our time, well, they've done this in the past and it doesn't work. Well, no, let's look at it. And I have had some families where it was very tense relationship between them and their loved one. And it's one of the things where I find that you don't give up on those relationships. Because I had one in particular that it was the first time I met the family, everybody ended up crying during my initial meeting, trying to figure out. And I was like, well, move ahead 5 years. And I've been working with them on building their relationships together on a positive thing. Well, now their relationships are much better 5 years out than they were that initial day. I walked out of that first meeting with that family, and it was like, oh my goodness. I walked out, was kind of sick to my stomach, because it was so tense. It was obvious there was not a good situation. But now 5 years out, they much better. And they understand each other. And part of the thing I found sometimes with parents is they don't always understand that, yes, your child or loved one has a developmental disability. And this is why, because I run into that with parents sometimes. They don't understand why their child isn't doing well in school, particularly with the individuals that are considered higher functioning. Well, I don't understand why they aren't getting this math or whatever. And I have to explain to them, you realize that they do have a developmental disability, and that impedes their ability to do certain things. And so that might be something that they just are very difficult. It's always going to be very difficult for them. It's navigating that and helping parents understand that as well. Because, it's hard to understand why your child isn't doing well in one area or another, or why are they doing this? I never did anything like that. And so that's also helping parents understand why things are happening. And like I said, another thing that I've done is sit in on IEP meetings with parents to talk about things at school.
And that's helpful, because I feel like sometimes what's not always addressed in a case conference is the overall child, and having a case manager or one of your services come and, be able to give that overall synopsis of the child and what they're struggling with. Because sometimes what you see in school, because it's so structured, is the best of a child, but that doesn't mean that's what always occurs. They may break down, they may have moments of whatever. And it's nice having that outside service, because I feel like then everyone's communicating and then the whole child is being treated, whether it's with the school system or case manager, but at least everyone then is on the same page.
Well, and I found a lot of times with parents, I've had children that keep it together at school very well, but it is a true struggle for them. And when they get home, they completely melt down because they've tried so hard to keep it together at school that when they get home and actually get to their safe place, that's when you see a lot of the issues.
Exactly. I was just going to bring that. That's where I was going, is that it's safer for them to have the meltdown at home. And so when mom or dad or whoever is saying, oh my gosh, we just have these huge behaviors, and school's like, what? We don't see any of this. It is truly because they're spending so much effort.
But then their homework
keep it together in that setting, it's safe to be able to do that at home. And so it's great that, that's what's important about these services. They can happen in the home. Waiver services can. And with the proper supports, we can work through those instances where the behaviors are happening at home with behavior management or, whatever service that you choose to use that for that. It's just a great overall, tool, and case management and case managers are an integral part of making that happen. So thanks a lot, Steve, for talking with us today. We really appreciate you answer all of our questions and have for our listeners all those links that we mentioned during today's podcast. And so again, thanks for joining us, Steve.
Hey, no problem. Like I said, with parents or individuals, don't be afraid to ask your case manager any questions that you have, because we may not know, but you can we'll try to find out and get a good answer for you.
Great. Thanks for listening. Please stay connected with us on Facebook, Instagram, and sign up for our newsletter at myautismally.org. Talk with you next time at the My Autism Ally podcast.